So, big, bold statement to start it off. This is my attention-grabbing headline. Objections don't exist. Objections don't exist. And I'll preface that by saying objections should not exist. They shouldn't exist. If you think about it, where else do you hear the word objection? Probably from lawyer movies, unless you've been in a courtroom. We won't talk about that, but lawyer movies, right? Objection in the court. Think about it. Why does that word exist in our industry? It makes absolutely no sense until you dig a little bit deeper. By definition, an objection is an argument of opposition. Think about how detrimental that is. An argument of opposition. I don't like either one of those words in my role. Is that what we really want? We want to argue with our prospects? We know what happens when we're right and they're wrong, right? They have the ultimate veto power. They can say no out of spite. They can say no out of total illogic just because. They don't have to have valid reason to say no. They can make a horrible decision and we have no power against that. They have the ultimate veto. And we know how people react. It doesn't feel good to be wrong. Right? So if we make it them versus us, we lose, they lose. But also beyond that, the opposition part, that's the part I have a problem with. What are they opposing? What could they possibly have to oppose unless your only goal is to close deals? Unless you look at every human that you interact with as your commission check. Unless you kind of become the PIF junkie who's always just chasing deals and everything looked as qualified or disqualified. You're not looking at human beings with real problems, real situations. You're looking at where's my leaderboard? Where's my quota? Where's my commissions? And you dehumanize the whole process. Then you get opposition. Because sure, of course, I would oppose to someone treating me like commission too. I think we all would. I would oppose to you making money off me without caring what happens to me. I would definitely oppose that. But if we went into every call and your goal was to facilitate the best decision possible, if you took that seriously as your job, what could the prospect possibly object to? If they were to object, they would have to take the position that, no, I want to make the worst decision possible. I am devoting an hour of my day to talk to a stranger with the pursuit of making the worst decision possible. I don't think there's many prospects that are going to do that. So all of a sudden, if you position yourself as the facilitator of great decisions, you've removed any desire to object just by changing your positioning. This is collaborational alignment. I might have made that word up, but it sounds good. Collaborational alignment. You want the same things. It's also known as detaching from the sale. That's what it's most commonly known as. And when you do this, there's no longer any objections. Honestly, I can't think of any objections that I've ever heard. Can you? Like, really think about it. If you were totally detached from the sale and you went in every call with a blank canvas, blank slate, and your only goal was to facilitate the best decision possible, you won't hear any objections. What you'll start to hear is what's actually there. What you'll start to hear sounds more like fear, sounds more like doubt, sounds more like concerns. You may even hear some limiting beliefs. You'll hear someone who's misinformed or ignorant. You'll hear reasons, some valid, some not so much. And you'll hear roadblocks, challenges. But you'll no longer hear objections. And what you'll find is there'll be a lot less smoke screens. Again, back to the idea of extreme ownership. If you're someone who's been lied to often, you can play the victim role. It's a widely acceptable role in today's society. You'll get some credit for it. You'll get some attention. But if you take ownership and you say, I seem to be getting lied to more than the average person. Why? What is my role in that? Well, the logic would be maybe I make it difficult to tell the truth. Someone has identified that it's much easier to lie to me, that there's more reward and less risk to lie to me than to tell me the truth. It's the same thing with prospects. If you represent the sale and no is a bad word, then the prospect's going to create an illusion because they don't feel like they can tell you the truth, because they see that you represent and you work for the sale more than you work for them. So then you get these sidebar excuses. When you make it okay that no is a viable choice for some people, not only do the objections go away, but a lot of smoke screens go away too. And then what you're left with is really just roadblocks, challenges, puzzles that are to be figured out. Things that are getting in the way or preventing someone from making the yes with 100% confidence. Now, there's a lot of positives that happen when you take this mind frame on. But a big one is your energy won't shift like most salespeople who are inconvenienced by hearing objections. I've probably listened to a couple thousand calls from different salespeople over my career. And one thing I notice at all times is the energy shift when an objection comes up. It's like you just stole from them. You can feel the weight, the inconvenience, the ugh. I wanted everything to just be smooth. Put those same salespeople on a call and ask them to spend $10,000. Now all of a sudden you hear some concerns, you hear some doubts, you hear some fears, you hear the normal human experience to making a big decision. So again, unless we want to be hypocritical, we have to sell like this. So I want to focus in on fear, doubt, and concerns because they're all relatives and they're the ones that are most likely to get in the way of a good decision. I'm not so worried about reasons because there are some valid reasons why buying doesn't make sense. And again, if I'm positioned to say, I want to help this person make the best decision, sometimes there's reasons that come up that make this not a good decision. I'm not worried about handling spouse objections because if I was about to spend $10,000 and I had a spouse, I would be talking to them as well. So I'm not trying to maneuver those things. Those are reasonable decision-making process that makes sense. I'm going to control them. I'm going to influence on my terms. I'm going to challenge them to see if they're actually weighted, but I'm not going to attack logical reason because again, that's going to position me outside of that trusted advisor role. What I'm going to focus on is the people who should, the people who could, the people who can afford, who don't. That's the opportunity. Buyers buy, great. Non-buyers shouldn't buy, great. It's that middle ground that I'm going to obsess with. The people who should, could, would, and don't. And what I've found is it's typically one version of doubt, fear, or concern. So if that's going to prevent those middle ground people and that's the only area we can improve. Buyers buy, non-buyers don't buy. If all we can improve is that middle ground, don't you think we should understand the things that are most likely to prevent people from making a good decision? Don't you think we should understand forget sales? Don't you think you should understand why you make bad decisions? I know no one on this call does, but the rest of the world, why do we make bad decisions? I know you guys all make perfect decisions all the time, but if you didn't, if you were human and you made some bad decisions, why do you make them? Forget bad for a second, suboptimal. Why sometimes do we know the right decision and we make the other one? That's curious to me. Even if we weren't selling, that would be beneficial. The quality of your life is in direct proportion to the quality of your decisions. You want a better life, make better decisions. There's not an area of your life that you wouldn't improve if you didn't strategically make better decisions consistently. It's impossible. So this seems like something that's extremely important. And I've been in sales 17 years, remote sales for 7 years. I've explored every training you could possibly find. The best I can find is, oh, when they say this, you say that. I think there's some more depth to fear and doubt and concerns that we can sink our teeth into. Okay? They're all natural. They're all relative. We experience them. And so we should expect the prospect to have and experience them. So we should dive in a little bit more. Okay? And so in this scenario, since we've removed objections and our goal is to facilitate the best decision possible, I'm going to drill that as many times as possible until that's hopefully widely accepted in our industry as what our job is supposed to be. We should understand that these three things and the ability to influence them is extremely important in our job. Historically, fear, doubt, concerns interfere with the quality of decision making. When I think back in my life, emotions, fears are always tied to poor decisions. I'm not talking about the decision that ended up being poor and you didn't know about it. I'm talking about the one that was right in front of your face. You go left or you go right, and you choose the wrong way, knowing what you know, knowing enough to make the right decision. When you think back, and I recommend doing this, think back of some of those pivotal suboptimal decisions you've made and get to the root. What was happening there? Understanding why you make bad decisions is very important in influencing someone else to not make bad decisions. And so the idea here is to seek a better understanding of these things to be more equipped to be able to serve, plain and simple. So another thing that I like to do, which I've found very valuable for me, whether you take it or not, is when I hear something, a word that I want to understand better, I start with the definition. I look up probably 20 definitions a day because I want to see what the actual wording means. And then I want to see how far society has taken it. Sometimes we take our word and just move it to where we want it to be. If I want to test what is the true meaning compared to how do I feel or perceive this thing to be. So in doing that, right, fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by a perceived threat. That risk we always talk about. Just an unpleasant emotion. Now, concern is an uneasy state of mind based on anticipation of misfortune or trouble. Again, risk. But it's more, instead of the emotion, it's now the anticipation. That's an important segue. It's no longer a feeling. It's now visualized. It's now lives in our imagination, which we talked about last time. The imagination plays a huge role in our decision making. If we can't imagine a better possibility, we give up the possibility, right? We settle. And then doubt, a feeling of uncertainty or trustworthiness of something or someone. I didn't know this until I looked those up. If you asked me before, what was the difference between concern and doubt? Couldn't tell you. I could make up my own definition. But it's really interesting. There's a lot of clues there. And so taking this back to the little I know about psychology, it's all rooted in uncertainty. Uncertainty is the root cause of all three. Different ways of going about it, right? Doubt is more about trust. Concern is more about anticipation. Fear is that emotion. But it's all uncertainty. So remember, one of the most baseline needs is the ability to feel like we can freely seek pleasure and reward and avoid risk, punishment, and pain. That's deeply rooted. Survival brain 101. So in a lot of ways, fear actually keeps us safe. If we didn't feel fear, we would most likely commit to dangerous and reckless activities. We need fear, but we can't let fear drive. Again, I've always said fear is a great passenger, it's a horrible driver. Right? Just like we need pain, because if I didn't have pain and I was walking around on a broken leg, that would cause more damage. We need these things. They're built in for a reason. There's a lot of design that worked for us. It just, when we were designed, it wasn't anticipation of this world. We evolved into this world, so we have to figure out a way to make it fit. So remembering that safety is one of our baseline survival needs. You start talking about ROI and opportunity and significance and accomplishment with someone that doesn't have their basic survival needs, you lost them. If you have those auto response, right? When they say, I can't afford it, you talk about ROI, and someone's worried about safety, might as well throw in the towel. Because again, it's a hierarchy, which means you start, if you don't have those, you don't go up. But as our brains evolved, right, beyond safety, because there were saber-toothed tigers and the goal was basically eat and not get eaten. As we started to kind of master that safety, our brains evolved towards self-actualization. Survival became much easier and our brains expanded to pursue other things. So fear didn't have as much to go, but it's still built in there. So it started to bleed into other aspects of our subconscious and conscious mind. Our minds evolved, and so did our fear. So now, instead of being that primal eat or be eaten, most people are not at risk at being eaten today, hopefully. And so the fear bleeds into other things. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough. Whew, that's a big one. I'd say fear of failure and fear of not being good enough are one of the most deeply rooted. If you trace everything back deep enough, it's one of those two things. Which really is a fear of not being accepted, fear of not being good enough, fear of scarcity, not having enough, fear of exclusion or difference. That's a tribal evolution where we knew that being kicked out of the tribe was dangerous. It meant it was much harder to survive. You needed a tribe back then. So that's why we have all these social connections where we need to feel part of something. It's based on our primal brain. Fear of lack of control, which is tied into certainty. Fear of being alone, again, tied into that tribal. Fear of illness or death or survival at its core, right? And then fear of insignificance, and everything kind of branches off from those, right? Those are the big 10. Fear, failure, success, rejection, not being good enough, scarcity, exclusion, control, alone, illness, death, insignificance. Right? And so going back to the definition, the fear itself is just an unpleasant emotion. The fear in itself doesn't really have much power. I can make good decisions based on any emotion I have. I can be sad and make good decisions. I can be happy. I can be, I can be depressed and make good decisions. It's harder, but the fear itself is just an emotion. Fear itself has no power. It's all the other aspects that we tie to it. And so we just have an unpleasant emotion, which we are equipped to deal with. But when it comes to the expression and anticipation, that's where doubts and concerns come in. That's what we're more likely to hear communication-wise. People are not as good expressing their emotion as they are tying it to some sort of logic. And anticipation is most people's ability to communicate what could go wrong. They're communicating the fear, but in a logical sense. So expressing that uncertainty in a form of lack of trust, lack of confidence, or some sort of negative anticipation. These are great things to hear on a call because they're real and they're going to happen. So I want to hear these things. So you'll hear a call with me and it's like the energy shifts from to a positive, where most salespeople, it's just go negative. Like, there goes my lay down deal for the day, right? It's an inconvenience. But I know these things are underlining anyway, so I want to be able to talk and have influence over them. And so I don't know if you can rank them, but one thing I've found, and this is only my own antidote really, but probably of the three, the one that has led to most suboptimal decisions more than the other two is doubt. Think about it. Concern, you can have all kinds of concerns. You can be concerned and still make good decisions. Fear, it's just the emotion. But a healthy level of fear wakes you up. Concerns can be logical. You can tie them. It makes sense. But doubt has the ability to demoralize you like nothing else. Doubt, if not managed, has the ability to distract and weaken the decision-making process. It can also be one of the hardest to see. It can be one of the hardest to identify. When personal feelings and preconceived notions and prejudices get involved, people don't see what is there. They start to distort their perception. But a good observer will be able to separate personal feelings and see things the way they are. So our job first is to observe, not to answer, not to argue, not to debate, not to convince, but first observe. Make sure that we are able to view things that might be out of the prospect's awareness level. Because again, if doubt is not properly handled, we're not talking to these people on day one of life. Some of these people 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years in. Some of these things have been building up and making stronger connections and then self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, all of a sudden, instead of a feeling 20 years ago, it's a fact. When you hear someone say, you know, the world's full of bad people. What does that mean? You know 8 people. Where do you find those facts? Right? Things are getting worse. Then what? You literally used to be able to beat someone up and take their wife and family and then leave. Someone could come in and burn your village down. It's much better than it is now. We're talking on some crazy device. We have more opportunity than ever. Quality of life. So where are you getting that information from? That's perception and a weird value system. We're going to notice something bad more than we're going to notice something good. And then you have media that's showing us all the bad stuff. Here's an hour of bad things that happened today. Well, there's no opposite news, right? There's no an hour of like, here's the best thing that happened in your neighborhood today. Right? So our perception gets distorted. And then we start looking for those things. That's when our focus gets distorted. And then again, that's a bias. If I go out and buy a white Honda Civic today, tomorrow I'm going to notice there's more on the street. There wasn't a big sale. My focus. And so we have to be able to observe these things. We have to be able to use some empathy to figure out how the person got here and what might be distorted. Doubt can hide in many different ways. The desire to escape, avoidance, your classic procrastination and perfectionism, right? Doubt hides in perfectionism because perfectionism seems like more secure, more safe, It's an identity. You don't want doubt as an identity. It's not, there's no longevity to it. It either is or it's not. It's two on the fence. But I'm a perfectionist. I work well under pressure. These are all stories that we made up that we tied to our identity to hide our doubt in ourselves. Really, what most perfectionists and procrastinators are saying is, I'm afraid to do my best because what if my best is not good enough? So I'm always going to hide behind the fact that I'm a perfectionist or that I didn't try, so that I don't have to admit that maybe I'm not good enough. So avoidance, overly judgmental. Judgmental people are usually just fearful people, right? And they doubt. Any defeated behavior, any hatred. Hatred is usually fear-based. It's an emotional reaction. It's an evolutionary tool to keep us safe. Victimization, settling, compromise, negativity, pessimism, resistance. All of those things are underlying or kind of a front for doubt. Doubt in self, doubt in others. It's keeping things certain. Because again, doubt, the brain doesn't like in the middle things. Doesn't like the fence sitters. The brain is not good at processing two truths at once that are conflicting. So it has to choose a side. This is called cognitive dissonance. Basically, it's our brain at war with itself. So it's very hard to think most of the world is good and most of the world is bad. So it's a battle, right? And we're going to go with the thing that we're most certain about, which is probably this thing that we've seen or noticed the most. Right? And so it's really the idea of this psychological discomfort with having two or more thoughts. And again, knowing what we talked about last time, which is the brain will always go to the undesirable known rather than the desirable unknown naturally. So that means when there's a standstill or a stalemate, the brain is going to look and warp perception to be back in alignment. So if you want something, but also doubt is possible, if you stay in that stalemate long enough, your perception will start to shift towards impossibility. That's where you hear people talk about, well, the economy and the education system and the government and this and that, right? They're starting to stack the reason because they don't want to stay in the fence of I can do it, but I can't do it. I can do it, I can't do it. It's easier to just go, I can't. So a prospect's doubts and concerns aren't your enemy. You should be glad that you're hearing them. Anyone who's been doing this long enough can tell you it's the people who seem totally excited, who raise no concerns or questions. Those are the people you need to be wary about. Those are the people that are going to cut out at the last minute. They're going to give you 4 credit card numbers and then disconnect and you never hear from them again. We're in the high ticket space. That means big purchases, big decisions. Humanly, it just doesn't make sense that someone is just willing and able to make 10K, 20K, 30K without any concerns, doubts, questions. It doesn't make any sense. So what would change if we expected those? If we welcomed them, if we opened to those things, if we drew them out? If early on the call, we wanted to find out what they're concerned about. And instead of answering or convincing, we started to understand first. We started to really draw out. We started to validate those concerns. How would that change the rest of the call? Right? We need to start viewing concerns and doubts and fears as an opportunity. That's where, I hear all these stupid trainings about how to build authority and rapport. You want real authority and rapport? Welcome these concerns and these fears and tell someone they're right for thinking about that. Appreciate that. Validate those concerns. I would be in the same position. I actually thought about that. A lot of people say that, right? The more welcoming you are to logical restrictions and decision-making, you don't have to worry about a rapport section in your training. You just have it because it's built on trust. And understanding the principle is uninterested people don't raise concerns. That one mental reframe has really, really helped me. And so